Good afternoon once again to week 15. This is our second lesson for the week. It is a revision lesson. We're trying to get our students to be able to read a story on their own and answer questions at the end of the story. This is an unseen passage related to a story we did before St. Matthew Island. St. Matthew Island. I'll read through the passage and then we will discuss it and answer the questions. Comprehension. The Silk Road. The Silk Road was a major trade route between Asia and Europe. It was over 5,000 miles long. A 19th century geologist named it for silk, which comes from China. Silk was one of the first items brought to the West from China. Cloth made from the cocoons of silkworms is very soft. In the Roman Empire, people traded an ounce of gold for an ounce of silk. People, goods, and ideas moved along the Silk Road. Traders rode camels across huge deserts and through narrow mountain passes. In addition to silk, goods including perfume, grapes, and the beautiful gems came and went by way of the Silk Road. Ideas traveled too. Buddhism, for example, spread outward from India and became a major religion in China. No one is sure how the Silk Road began. During the Qing dynasty, 221 BC to 206 BC, many invaders attacked China. The emperor built the Great Wall of China to protect his lands. He didn't allow trade outside his country. During the Han Dynasty, 202 BC to AD 220, a different emperor sent a group to meet with the strong state to the west named Persia. He wanted to know more about the world outside his country. The group did not return for 12 years. Its leader reported that Persia was too far away. However, he thought China could trade with that state. Around 110 BC, trade began between China and Persia, but bandits in the desert and mountains kept robbing traders along the route. Han leaders realized that they couldn't control the whole route alone. They needed local villages to make the route safe for the traders. Once these were set up, trade grew. Many villages became bigger cities and towns. Some of their customs traveled back to China. By the 2nd century BC, trade also began between China and the Roman Empire. Silk passed from one group of traders to another until it arrived in Rome. It took 2 years, making the trip too far for one person. The power of the Han, Chinese, and the Romans grew. Neither group knew much about the other. The Romans called the Han Chinese the Silk people. They thought silk grew on their trees. After many centuries, sea routes replaced the Silk Road. The long exchange of ideas had a big impact in China. It also stated the connection between China and the West that is still going strong today. Before we come to the questions, let's look briefly at what the story is all about. Okay, of course, the story title is The Silk Road, which was a major route, a road between Asia and Europe. It's about 5,000 miles long, right? And it was a geologist, somebody who studies about rocks, Okay, who named it? Who gave it the name for the silk that comes from China? Of course, according to the passage, silk was one of the first items brought to the West from China. Chinese people, they invented silk, and they made cloth from the cocoons of silkworms. It was very soft. So the Roman people decided to have a trade with the Chinese people. They traded 1 ounce of gold for 1 ounce of silk. And quickly, people, goods moved along the Silk Road, the new road that was created between Asia and Europe. And traders traveled on camels across deserts and mountain passes. Then, apart from the silk, they also traded in perfume, grapes, beautiful gems, and then Buddhism. Those people who practice a religion called Buddhism spread outward from China. It was practiced by the Indians and became a major religion in China. Okay, so during the reign of the emperor called the dynasty called Qing dynasty, many invaders, they attacked China. So the emperor at that time decided to build a wall to protect the land. It didn't allow any trade to take place outside his country. Then another regime called the Han dynasty, who ruled from 202 BC to 220, sent a group to meet with strong states to the west, which was called Persia. They wanted to know more about the rest of the world, unlike the previous emperor who didn't want to know anything that was happening outside. The group of men who went did not return for 12 years. The leader reported that Persia was very, very far away, and he thought China could trade with that state. Around 110 BC, trade started between China and Persia, though Persia was very far away. But there were thieves or bandits or highway robbers who attacked people on the road, and they needed local villages to make routes safe for the traders. And many villages became bigger cities. They grew into cities and towns. Some of their customs, they transported them back to China, and so on and so forth. So towards the end of the passage, after many centuries, sea routes replaced the Silk Road. People traveled by sea. The long exchange of ideas between China and the rest of the world had a big impact in China. And it started a connection between China and the West. And that's continued up to today, which makes the relationship or connection between China and the West still very strong. Let's look at the questions. First question, in this notification non-fiction passage, the author mainly shows the effects of traveling the Silk Road on traders, encourages traders to visit the Silk Road, tells about the history of the Silk Road, describes the sights and sounds of the Silk Road. The best answer is it tells about the history of the Silk Road, how it started. Question 14, people in the Roman Empire considered silk, F, very rough, G, easy to make, H, very valuable, J, too expensive. The people in the Roman Empire considered silk very valuable. 15, goods were transported along the Silk Road by A, camels, B, carriages, C, bandits, D, silkworms. It was people who travel on camels transported the goods. 16, information in the passage supports the idea that F, there were no religions in China until Buddhism. G, Chinese emperors were kind to their subjects. H, silk was discovered by the Romans. J, ancient China was a very large and isolated country. Yes, the evidence is there in the passage that ancient China, old China, was a very large and isolated country. It was on its own. Question number 17, based on the passage, when did the villages begin appearing along the Silk Road? Well, A, when bandits began robbing the traders. B, when silk became popular. C, when China needed places to meet with Roman traders. D, when big Chinese cities became too crowded. From what we see in the passage, there was a time when armed robbers or bandits started robbing traders. So A is correct. 18, what information supports the idea that China and Persia were very far from each other? F, Buddhism became a major religion in China. G, the group sent to Persia by the Han Emperor did not return for 12 years. H, bandits attacked travelers on Silk Road. J, villages were formed along the Silk Road. The best answer is G. The group sent to Persia by the Han Emperor did not return for 12 years. Question number 19. Approximately how much time elapses in this passage? 15 years, A, B, 200 years, C, less than 100 years, D, more than 1,000 years. So more than 1,000 years, the best answer. The last question, what is the main idea of this passage? A summary of this passage. F, traveling on the Silk Road was long and difficult. G, the Silk Road was an important link between China and the West. H, the Silk Road was one of the many trade routes in China. And J, without silk, China will be isolated and unsuccessful. So the best answer is G. The Silk Road was an important link between China and the West. I hope we benefited a lot from reading an unseen passage and answering questions. So hopefully next time we'll have another interesting lesson. Hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining me.